Chapter 6. Practical Board Tasks for Business Ethics. Risk Oversight. Boards must determine the degree of risk that the company will accept to achieve its goals. Risk policy should identify all major risks and ensure that those with a high impact and a high probability of occurrence are effectively managed. Internal audit. Internal audit's role is to monitor and evaluate the company's internal control environment to validate that controls are effective in mitigating risks. To maintain their independence, open communication between the board, audit committee, external auditor and internal audit function should be facilitated. Compliance function. The compliance function provides reasonable assurance that the company is complying with applicable laws and regulations, as well as internal codes of conduct, policies and procedures. Maintain a practical relationship with internal audit. Ensure compliance function has open communication with the audit committee and board. Policy development, ethical codes of conduct, conflicts of interest, related party transactions, collusion between offices and vendors, confidentiality, ensuring adequate levels of competition, consequences for breaches of policy. Chapter 7. Business Ethics, Benefits, Principles, and Processes. Business ethics programs may benefit organizations in the following ways: integrity and reputation, protection from unethical employees and agents, improvements in performance, productivity, competitive position, lower costs, lower risks, expanded access to capital, credit and foreign investment, larger profits and sustained long-term growth, and increased international respect. You may also wish to look at Compliance Program Risk Inventory, pages 76 and 77, and SCCE Benefits List and ISO 26000 Benefits List, pages 78 and 79. Universal Principles of Business Ethics. Compliance with the law is a minimum standard. For additional benefits, it requires leadership and commitment. Organizational must be infused with these values: honesty, fairness, integrity, transparency, accountability. Shorthand for ethical business: do what you say you are doing. In other words, walk the talk. Do the right thing. That will increase your well-being and that of others. What does being ethical mean? Acting with the intent of and commitment to try and improve your own well-being and that of others, both inside and outside of the company. Many variations are possible and necessary. However, at the core of all sound business ethics programs is the interplay of three basic practices: statements of commitment, follow-through system, and accountability system. Imagine business ethics or an ethical business as a three-legged stool, as illustrated in Figure 2. Extremely stable if it has all three legs, but highly unstable if even one leg is missing. In fulfilling its responsibility for effective corporate governance practices and ensuring a business ethics framework within the organization, consideration of universal practices in business ethics which aid the implementation, monitoring and overall promotion and sustaining ethical behavior. Generally, there are three core areas which companies should focus on when developing a business ethics program within their organization. These include development of statements of commitments, which outline the parameters within which stakeholders, internal and external, are required to operate, sanctions for non-compliance, and mechanisms for redress. Examples of statements of commitments documents include Code of Business Standards, Declaration of Business Principles, Code of Conduct, and code of ethics. Design of a follow-through system that impacts all aspects of the organization. Such systems will seek to ensure that structures and resources are adequately allocated to ensure sustainability of the program. In particular, consideration should be given to the 6 areas listed below when designing follow-through systems: support and coordination, operations management, auditing and monitoring, strategic functions, policy or normative functions. Roles, processes, tools, and a framework altogether work to form a system. Whatever the size of the organization, evidence of a functioning business ethics system can be found in the following 6 areas: the front line or operations, where interactions with customers and other outside stakeholders take place and goods or services are produced. Here, you will find staff making decisions on how to interact with stakeholders and clarifying questions of ethics as they face dilemmas and gray areas of compliance, and managers trying to help them make ethical choices. Any suspected breaches of the code of ethics, including potential conflicts of interest, are reported. The organization's supporting and coordinating functions, where there are general standards and references to possible FAQs as well as IT systems for data entry and consolidation. Operations management, where there are performance plans with ethical business considerations requiring follow-up. The organization's auditing and monitoring function in the pursuit of ethical business commitments. The organization's strategic functions, monitoring and engaging the organizational environment and its current operations to determine what the company needs to decide on now in order to be viable in the future. Any factors affecting its ability to meet its ethical commitments must be systematically included in the analysis and decision-making process. The organization's policy and normative function, where its values, commitments, and policies need to be actively managed and must include guidance on its approach to ethics. Organization must also be accountable to those to whom the commitment is made. As such, organizations should have an accountability system which allows them to discover the impact that they make. Examples of mechanisms by which feedback can be obtained include surveys, publications, and meetings. If being ethical means acting with the intent of and a commitment to try and improve your own well-being and that of others, both inside and outside the company, then you also need to determine and be accountable for the impact of your actions on others. This process of discovery and of being accountable to those to whom you have made a commitment is the 3rd leg of the 3-legged stool. It can take a variety of different forms, as described in detail in subsequent steps. What is important is that it is a process in which others judge whether, in their opinion, you have lived up to your commitment. The most common types of accountability activities are: 1. Surveys, annual surveys of internal stakeholder perceptions. 2. Publications of BEP processes and outcomes in annual reports. And 3. Meetings, large or small meetings where staff and others are invited to express their opinion on management's view of the extent to which the company is living up to its commitments. Stakeholder map is a basis for a general differentiated approach to dealing or engaging with each identified stakeholder. Stakeholders and society. The second assessment is of the people and groups who have something to gain and lose from the way your business operates. Your stakeholders. Begin with a wider scan to take in all dimensions and then focus in on those with the most impact, though without completely ignoring the others. There are 3 types of relationships you need to take into account according to ISO 26000 Clause 5.2.1. 1. Relationships between your organization and society. Society has expectations of the corporations and organizations whose actions affect it. 2. Relationships between your organization and its stakeholders. Stakeholders are specific individuals or groups whose interests could be affected by the decisions and activities of your organization and may be both internal and external to the organization. Your organization needs to know who its stakeholders are and its impact on them. 3. Relationships between stakeholders and society. While stakeholders are part of society, their specific interests may not be aligned with those of society as a whole. Therefore, it is important for the organization to understand the relationship between the stakeholder interests that are being affected and society's expectations. Focusing on these relationships, the first task is to identify the organization's specific stakeholders. In order to assess the outside business environment, we need to identify your business's stakeholders and influencers and examine your relationship with each of them in greater detail. The Fraud Triangle analysis tool, developed by Donald R. Creasy, is useful in examining the extent to which your organization is exposed to ethics risks, including fraudulent activity. The Fraud Triangle describes 3 causal factors present in every instance of fraud and which, by implication, need to be eliminated in order to deter fraud, namely, motive or pressure, the need for committing fraud or the need for money, for example. Rationalization, the perpetrator's mindset justifying the commission of fraud. And opportunity, the circumstances making the commission of fraud possible, often the case when internal controls are weak or non-existent. Fraud prevention systems most often and directly seek to institute internal control systems to eliminate the element of opportunity. While considering the other elements as well, the main focus of a business ethics program is on the element of rationalization, because being clear as to what exactly being ethical means and what values the organization stands for and what it condones makes rationalization much less likely. Having clear systems and standards of behavior also reduces pressure. Because while targets may be set high and very hard to achieve, a code of ethics and clear and frequent statements by ethics leaders and managers will make it plain that the organization's ethical commitments may not be broken under any circumstances. The work conducted by the Ethics Resource Center, ERC, 2007-8, can provide a better understanding of ethics risks. Figure 8 shows that among surveyed risks in U.S. companies, the highest risk was associated with personal lapses, as opposed to misconduct that could be viewed as furthering the company's agenda. The important points here are knowing the common types of risks generally faced by an organization and their relative perspective. Granted, this is a predefined list of possible violations. It is helpful in designing your BEP. It shows what to pay attention to and what you can actively use in the awareness and communication program developed in Step 8. It is also very useful in developing processes and initiatives for transforming your organizational culture. Defining risk is an effective way of looking at ethics risks and has implications for your BEP. In the ideal situation, instances of misconduct or lapses are rare, but when they do occur, you want to be sure they show up in your records. In other words, having records that suggest there are not even any suspected violations or issues on which people are looking for clarification may actually create a false sense of security. Since all organizations are different and operate in different environments, there is no single or unique way of ethically conducting business in the form of a program. many variations are possible and necessary. The development of a code of ethics, sometimes referred to by other names such as a code of business standards, declaration of business principles, code of conduct, etc., is generally the first step taken by an organization once it decides that it is committed to business ethics. A code of ethics outlines the organization's values, beliefs, and in some cases, corresponding implementation procedures, and ties them to its mission, vision, and values. In order to truly qualify as a commitment, the written word must also be embodied in speech and deed, especially by the organization's top leaders. A code of ethics is a formal commitment by your organization to its values and to related practices and standards. The analysis performed in the previous steps will ensure as the basis for deciding which factors to address, both in terms of what to try and avoid and what to aim for. The procedure in this step must meet two important conditions. It must address all factors you wish and need to be held accountable for, and it must speak to all stakeholders in a way they understand, feel is authentic, and which can guide their actions. The procedure outlined in this step is designed to meet both these conditions. The key steps in developing a code of ethics are as follows. Draft a preliminary version of the code. Consult with experts. Consult with stakeholders. Finalize the code. Present the code for approval by the board. Publicize the code. In order to be readable and accessible, the Code of Ethics should not seek to address an exhaustive list of circumstances. Highly specific issues requiring more detailed guidance or which are more narrow in scope, applying only to very specific groups or circumstances, are more appropriately addressed by the development of specific policies, as in the case of procurement. For all other circumstances, and as a general overall guide, it is helpful to develop ethical decision-making guidelines. See Section 5.4. The Code of Ethics content can be structured into 5 key areas. Intro and principles. Relationship specific. Roles and policies, RASCI. Operational processes, program, elements, policies, strategic coordination, auditing, reporting processes, and resources. This code should be reviewed, confirmed, and formally adopted by a meeting of the board. The board and senior management should also issue signed statements supporting the adoption of the code. Policies and procedures, like the Code of Ethics, should be living documents. They should be an integral part of the organization's day-to-day operations and need to be periodically reviewed and revised as necessary.